Connor's chat. I know you are delighted to see me again. I know you missed me. You thought last time Connor and I were chatting, you were just convinced. You heard my base takes. You were like, my God, what a horrible mistake I've made not believing in this Ryan Mullally character and his incredibly persuasive arguments. And now the best thing about not being able to see your chat is I can just assume that all of you are agreeing with everything I'm saying right now. Like, I think people are just saying, you know what, holy shit, that was a wonderful chat. And I know they did mostly geopolitics and Ryan just absolutely nailed it. And then today we're going to do the second half of the conversation and do kind of like a broader, less geopolitics focused thing. And I'm sure once again, I will convince you of the based ways that I have been following. In all seriousness, though I cannot see your chat at all, so I have no idea what you are saying. If there is criticisms of my positions or things that you want Connor to ask me, like, list them, throw them out there. Let me know. But I'm
that person. Sorry for interrupting, but that person who said, "Oh, you're not pressing him hard enough." When I asked them, "What do you want me to press them on?" They didn't answer. They came back the next day to say, you didn't press Ryan hard enough, and then they never spoke in my chat ever again. Yeah. So like that's kind of horseshit. Now I know what I want to press you on today, but sorry, please continue your rant, and then I know what I want to press you on, and I'm curious what you want to talk about today.
Yeah. I was just telling your chat about how delighted they are to see me again, and what a wonderful time we have together, and how obviously I've convinced them about all of my positions, and the delightful times we share. Now I can't see them, so I assume they're agreeing with me. And
they're having a beautiful time.
Oh yeah.
So Grassroots Hegemon for $10 says, I'm asking you to ask Ryan to make Weld QC John a moderator on Ryan's channel. And I can vouch for Weld QC John. He's not one of my schizo lefties. He's one of my conservatarian fishing and hunting bros.
Yeah.
So if you were worried about a crypto lefty corrupting your chat, he's not that guy.
No. Grassroots, first of all, it's an interesting strategy to oil Connor instead of me when trying to get your guy modded. Now, I know you oiled me yesterday, but I'm just saying, while I appreciate Connor's take, I mean, Jesus, I feel like you're barking up the wrong tree with the oiling. But right, I will say, I hit up John in Discord and asked him why he wants to be a mod, and if he wants to be a mod, he should tell me why he wants to be a mod, and then we'll talk about it. So, recommendation accepted, despite your money going to the wrong guy.
Right. Okay. So let me tell you what I want to ask and press you on, and then you can tell me if you had an agenda for today that might either be contradictory or competing for time. Because around 2, I'm supposed to be picking up a kiddo, so I need to be mindful of that. Now, what I wanted to press you on, which I thought was interesting, was there's this vibe of, and I'm not saying that you fit this, but the why I left the left thing. Right? The left wing has gone to extreme. They seem to be playing with left wing freaks, and therefore this is not for me. And I can easily articulate that, like Hassan Piker, anti-Americanism, some of the trans stuff rubbed me wrong. A lot of the economic stuff does rub me wrong. The gun control rubs me wrong. And so as a result, that's why I will never like full-throatedly identify as a Democrat, because they rub me wrong on these 5 or 6 topics. And not just that, they're pretty clear that this is core to their identity. That like being pro-gay, being anti-gun, being anti-American imperium, these are core to their identity. So we're just not going to see eye to eye on it. However, when I've heard you articulate this in the past, I heard you talk about trans issues, but I wanted to press you on this because I think we came, despite, I know that you didn't vote for Trump in the most recent election, but
or
I think
any
despite
election.
that, what's that? Or any election.
Or any election.
I think despite that, I think people see our rhetorical emphasis and see that it's different. And so they see that I'm more sympathetic to liberals, center-left liberals, than you are. And so I kind of wanted to press you on what are the things that turned you off about the left and shifted you into your current political position. So before we get into that, what did you want to talk about today?
No, I think that's fine, because what I wanted to get into was what you think the future of your political advocacy is looking forward to 26, which is, the midterms, and then 28, which is a post-Trump election. Because, the thing about being a never Trumper that has struck me in some conversations I've had with never Trumpers recently is, he started running for office in 2016. It's been 10 years. So I think it's fair for people on the right to be like, oh, if you've been a dedicated never Trumper for 10 years, that means you've been voting against the right and advocating against the right for 10 years. That's a long time, right? So like,
you might as well be a fucking Democrat at this point.
I mean, functionally, so I think the question then becomes like, well, what,
no, that is funny.
What comes next? Like, is it another 10 years of advocating against the right?
Yeah,
because if so, like at a certain point, you got to say,
no, I want to qualify. I want to qualify my history real quick because I do think that's really fun. No, that's actually really funny. So what happened was I did not have the binary political perspective that I do now of lesser of two evils calculus when it came to voting a decade ago. The way that I perceived it, and I perceived it the entirety of my life, is that voting is a privilege, that it is the exercise of political power, that the exercise of political power should be used judiciously and with great contemplation for calculation and risk. And so I actually don't even think that I voted up until 16. And I think in 16, I left the top of the ticket blank. Why two Connor windows? Thank you for reminding me. I'm going to remove the second Connor window. I appreciate that. In 16, I think I left the top of the ticket blank and I voted for everything else. The reason why I didn't vote for Trump was almost exclusively, but not entirely exclusively, because I thought he was a dipshit for his comments about John McCain in the military.
Yep.
That made him persona non grata. But then I could, and I know Christian Valeris is going to get pissed at this, but I could not in good conscience vote for Hillary Clinton because she truly does seem like a Machiavellian, demonic, manipulative, Washington, D.C., like child-eating scumbag. And I could not in good conscience click that box. So I didn't. And then when everybody was freaking out in 16 that Trump was going to destroy the world, I was like, he's limited in power. Congress is still going to restrict him. Don't worry about it. And weirdly enough, 16 to 18 or 19, with the repeal, I know I'm going into a lot of lore, but indulge me. I don't know when the repeal of Roe versus Wade was, but I had been told by my conservative parents that Roe versus Wade was vulnerable legalistically in this way for decades.
It was, yeah.
Right? Decades. They were telling me I was probably 8 in 1995 or 1996, and my parents made it clear to me that they were pro-life. The repeal of Roe versus Wade was a true political project of theirs. And part of the reason why they voted for the Republican Party was because, in their opinion, there was an infanticide genocide going on for decades, and they did not need to pass legislation. They just needed a conservative Supreme Court to repeal Roe versus Wade, and they would be Gucci. So when that happened, the entire country had an existential crisis. I didn't have an existential crisis at all. I was like, holy shit, the Republicans did something. That's fucking crazy. And then 2020, that was Biden, right? I think I either left the top of the ticket blank or I did click for Biden, and then 24 I clicked for Kamala. But
you don't remember if you voted for Biden?
I don't. I really don't. I think some of Joe Biden's early onset dementia rubbed off on me, and now I have early onset dementia, so I don't remember.
Well, I can say then that, for those in your chat who are all upset at me all the time, I have voted for a substantially larger number of Democrats than Connor has. I voted Democrat top of the ticket every year that I was able to vote in the presidential election, which is, I was too young in 2000. But it was everything post 2000, straight through until 24, when I started Team Centrist. And then, after a while of talking publicly on the internet and realizing that there was just no, I think you said this well earlier, there was no convincing the left of the things that were my core priorities. Like the things that were because I agree with the things that you said, and I would add some more to them. Like I think institutionalizing the kind of like modern, and I don't even mean this as an far left. I think this is the baseline position on the regular day-to-day left now. The kind of like, it's not racism if it's racism against a historically dominant power group, or it's not sexism if it's against men, that sort of thing. That is a mainstream position on the left, and in the Biden administration, they were very close to making it the law of the land. Like, they were instituting it into law with some frequency. It turns out that, like, when you talk about Roe v. Wade, like, I'm a big proponent of constitutional originalism. It matters to me. And if you look at Justice Jackson, who Biden's appointment, she's, I mean, obviously I want to maintain decorum, but she's the weakest appointment to the Supreme Court I've ever seen. Like, it just, like, she does not have the same level of legal acumen as the other justices, and her writings articulate a vision of the country where the judiciary is the supreme branch that has oversight authority over every other branch in a way that I think is contrary to core constitutional values. And then
you might have just said this, but I want to ask you a follow-up question. So do you identify as an originalist in the way that you consider like law?
Yes, I'm both an originalist and a unitary executive guy. So
my chat's probably going to freak out on the unitary executive thing, but so we'll dig into that in a second. But with the originalist thing, this is something that was explained to me again by my conservative parents as I was growing up. So effectively, there's a multitude of philosophies that come from the judicial branch, but the two main ones that people often fight over, at least from the way that I was told, was progressive interpretation and originalism.
Living constitutionalism would be the phrase for it.
For the progressives?
Yeah, it's the idea that the Constitution is a living document that gets updated over time, and our understanding of it changes as our society develops. And progressive is a good way of framing it, because we move closer and closer to this virtuous society, and the wise Supreme Court justices update the Constitution along the way.
But this is the extreme frustration with that concept compared to originalism, because with originalism, oftentimes there's contemporaneous, meaning at the same time, writings from the people who were either crafting legislation or amending the Constitution or whatever, and they explain their intent behind the law that they're passing. And so as a result, an originalist will say, no, it's the legislature's job to repeal, replace, write, submit legislation. And so if you do not like the interpretation of an old law, it's the legislature's job to repeal said law and enshrine a new law. Whereas what a progressives often do, and they do this in California and Hawaii all the time, they'll effectively say, oh, through this like loose interpretation of the words, they will solely take almost a textualist interpretation of the words on paper. They will infer a legalistic argument that could almost be substantiated through their logic, and then they just apply that as a ruling. And that's one of the things that gets particularly frustrating when it comes to firearms shit in California and Hawaii compared to an originalist perspective on the Second Amendment, is effectively like, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The people have a right to keep, meaning they hold on to weapons, and bear, meaning they have a right to keep it on their person. But then what DC, Chicago, New York, and California, Hawaii have done through time is they've increasingly chipped away at this right, to the point that you have to go to a local law enforcement officer to get permission to bear arms. Yeah. And there is no historical argument that would ever support that perspective. The only way they arrived there is through living constitutionalism.
Yeah. So I think there's that's mostly right. If I'm going to nitpick, originalism is not about intent, it's about public meaning. And this is a difference, right? Because a lot of the time, living constitutionalists like to play this game where they say, like, oh, well, clearly the people who wrote the amendment intended. But those people are dead. They're not in the room. If you're trying to figure out what was in their head, you're doing navel gazing. You're looking at your stomach and saying like, oh, what do I think the guys who wrote the 14th Amendment believed? Oh, it turns out they agree with me. What a coincidence, right? It's just kind of this, it's kind of a masturbatory exercise. The question is not what did they believe in their heart of hearts? The question is, how did the public understand this text? What was the public meaning of the text? Now, of course, what the legislators said about it could be evidence of that. But it's not. We're not trying to figure out their intent. We're trying to figure out what the public understood it. And then to give your chat like an example of originalism in action, and just to give make sure they understand this. I'm not. My frontline position on gay marriage is that the federal government should have nothing to do with marriage in any context ever for any reason. It's not the federal government's business. That's my preference. My second position is if the federal government must be involved in marriage, then gay marriage is probably the better policy. But I was opposed to the Supreme Court decision that made gay marriage the law of the land on originalist grounds, not because I think it's bad policy, but because I think it's a shitty legal decision. And here's why. Justice Kennedy, he looked at the 14th Amendment and he said, oh my God, in a society that's premised on liberty, where we want to avoid discrimination and do these great things, in my reasoned judgment, I have determined that gay marriage is required by the Constitution. Now, the word marriage never appears in the Constitution, right? And if you look at every single state, every single Congress, every single president in the entire constitutional history of our country up till 2015, when Justice Kennedy wrote those words, they all universally agreed for like 120 years that gay marriage was bannable and in fact was banned. So the idea that in his reasoned judgment, he has now determined that everyone in American history was wrong about what the document meant is crazy levels of hubris. Right? That's not to say that you can't have gay marriage, but pass a law. Pass a law. You can. If you don't
have the popularity to pass the law, then you're effectively circumventing the intent of the legislature, which is laws should be of such collective importance that we pass them because we have majority support for these laws. So the slowness of the legislature is not a flaw. It's actually a design feature. Where effectively like legislation is supposed to be overwhelmingly popular. Now,
and just to build on that.
Yeah.
Not only did they not have the votes to pass the law, by deciding it at the Supreme Court level, it's effectively a constitutional amendment. Like they didn't have the votes for the law, but to get an amendment, they would have needed a supermajority and ratification in 3/4 of the states. And if they were nowhere close to the law, they were 100 years away from a constitutional amendment. So it's profound.
But that leaves
profoundly
gay
undemocratic.
marriage.
It's profoundly undemocratic is the problem. For a justice
and that
to
also
amend the
leaves
Constitution
gay marriage susceptible. I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I want to point this out to the chat before I lose the idea. That also leaves them vulnerable to the same way that Roe versus Wade was vulnerable, because Roe versus Wade was also legislated from the bench, where they inferred a right to privacy in order to create where they like divided the personhood of a fetus through like logical inference. And then they set this standard of like viability as like the establishment of personhood. And then they allowed abortion to be legal throughout the country up to a certain state, even in red states, which created a huge resentment within the conservatives and the red states, which created the pro-life movement, which then caused the march down the eventual repeal to Roe versus Wade. So I think that the good news, at least the good news for gay people anyways, is that the popular consensus with homosexual people is probably so well established that I do not think that gay marriage is as vulnerable as abortion was. However, it's still entirely possible that an overwhelmingly conservative Supreme Court could repeal homosexual marriage from the bench as easily as it was enshrined from the bench.
Well, and just to give your chat an example of like why you should be suspicious of this kind of, it's called substantive due process. This is the doctrine where they kind of invent rights that are not articulated in the Constitution. Imagine if the right-wing justices started doing the same thing, because historically there was a period where they did. Here's one that conservative justices did in the past. They said it's been overturned, but They said, we looked at the Constitution and it guarantees your liberty. Doesn't liberty include the liberty of contract? Don't you have freedom of contract? And since you have freedom of contract, aren't minimum wage laws unconstitutional? Aren't child labor laws unconstitutional? Because you have the freedom as an American to contract as you choose. In fact, we're going to invent this constitutional right. It's not listed in the Constitution, but it's a liberty, and we're all inventing liberties, right? So minimum wage law, unconstitutional. And that's not, right. If you're a living constitutionalist, that's fair game. Why not?
And they can do. By the way, somebody in my chat is like, well, Connor, doesn't this go against your general preference for elites to be leading the people? And that's true. So for instance, like, let's say, I forget what judicial agreement or ruling there was in the 19th century, but there was a 19th century ruling effectively like enshrining chattel slavery. I forget what it is, but it's like popularly cited as a way that the Supreme Court, like, quote unquote, got it wrong.
Dred Scott.
And so, what's that?
Dred Scott.
So Dred Scott, unsurprised, and the unsurprised that it because it was so often cited. But the point of that being, like, you are right that I think that morality, insofar as humans perceive it, is should override your sense of like legality and proceduralism. So if the Supreme Court, the way that they legislated the bench in order to reinforce chattel slavery, if they had actually overridden chattel slavery and said, nope, sorry, Black people are human and they are entitled to human rights, therefore the institution of chattel slavery is actually constitutionally prohibited, it's now banned across the United States, I think they probably would have prompted a civil war, which would not have been great, but I would have viewed that as moral. So I think that Ryan and I, when we're talking about this, we're kind of being descriptive, where we're talking about the system as it was designed to be, as it should be. And I think one of our frustrations, I mean, I don't know if you share this frustration, but I share this frustration. It feels like a lot of people, and this includes MAGA and this includes some Democrats, as long as the outcome is okay, they don't give a fuck about the procedure.
100%. They don't give a fuck at all. And the thing about this that really concerns me is that, like, people focus on the Supreme Court, but as much as I was critical of Justice Jackson as an appointment, if you look at the judges that the left has been appointing recently, they are oftentimes expressly activist. Like I read the craziest fucking opinion I've read in my life. I don't need to bore you with the legal details, but the temporary protected status program.
The reason why I want you to indulge me in the legal details is because I feel like there would be a liberal objection to, for instance, you brought this up last time and I didn't challenge you on it, but I think my chat would have challenged you on it. You said that activist judges are hamming up the Trump administration in reference to deportations and sorry if I'm misquoting you, but if it resonates with something that you believe, then please address it. You said that you have seen activist judges ham up the Trump administration in reference to mass deportation operations in ways that you think are so flagrant that they're almost unprecedented. Yeah. So if you had a example, I would actually love to hear.
I can give you two off the top of my head. So one in the temporary protective status program, which is the kind of like a refugee program based on for emergencies, like, earthquakes, that sort of thing. The Trump administration has been trying to terminate some of these programs because they've been around for like 20 years or so. And he tried to terminate in his first term. They got gummed up in courts, and now he's trying to terminate them again. And there's been a number of judges who have said that they have reviewed the termination by the Trump administration, and that they've said it's illegal and you can't terminate. And they've ruled on it. But here's the thing. If you look at the law that says the TPS rule, it says in big letters, there is no judicial review of an executive branch decision to terminate. No judicial review. They are not allowed to review it. That's the law Congress passed. It is an executive decision with no judicial review at all. And these judges bend over backwards I think what she wrote is she said, I'm not reviewing the determination. I'm reviewing the process by which the determination was made. And because the process was flawed, I'm overruling that. Therefore, the determination is dead. And when she did it, she concluded with a sentence where she said, and I'm paraphrasing, but she said, "It is the role of those who are charged with making a more just society," meaning herself, a judge. By the way, that is not what judges are charged with doing. They are charged with interpreting the law, not making a more just society. But is the role of those who are charged with making a more just society to turn the lived experience of the disadvantaged into the protection of law. That's like an overtly postmodern, culturally Marxist, however, whatever phrase you want to use, turn of phrase. It is my job as a judge to promote social justice. That is not the role of a judge, and to turn subjective lived experience into legal protections, which is insane. So then, of course, that counts as the Trump administration getting overruled. District court judge slams Trump. You see all the news stories. But when it went up to the circuit court, they of course were like, "What the fuck are you doing? That's insane," and overruled her. But that's very quiet, and you don't hear about it, right? Or another example in Minnesota, there was all this press around the judge who said the stuff that's happening here is such a flagrant violation that I'm going to, I forgot his name, I'm going to order the head of ICE in operations to come in and give me a status report in person every day. And it got a lot of press about like how this judge was like, bringing the hammer down on this guy because of.
I'm still listening. I'm just grabbing something.
Yeah, no problem. Because of how fucked up that was. But then when that went up on appeal, the appellate court said like, it is a gross violation of separation of powers for a judge to require an executive officer to come in every day and give him status reports. It violates the core separation within the Constitution. You are putting yourself over an executive branch in the performance of his duty and making yourself his supervisor on day-to-day issues, which judges are not permitted to do. That it's so egregious that even though the case is kind of dead and Minnesota's no longer happening, we're still going to write an opinion on it just to tell you never to do this again, because it's outrageous that you did this. And you don't hear about that as much, right? So that's
Arthur,
the sort of thing I'm talking about.
At the risk of backing Ryan up instead of calling him a Nazi bigot, you say, well, what else could possibly be the job of a justice or a judge? So this actually does boil down to like philosophical divisions of powers that I remember from like middle school civics. And I think one of my frustrations with the current political zeitgeist is and Far Further Mouse says, no, I'm good on this another day. Well, dude, but that's what I'm saying. Like, you can't even entertain the argumentation of the fact that maybe progressive judges are going too far in some cases, and then hear an explanation about middle school civics. That to me feels weak. Like that, no offense, but that kind of feels like you just want me to regurgitate your own opinion to you rather than considering ideas that might be outside your wheelhouse. So in middle school civics, the concept that that went over, and this is particularly true in conservative circles. I mean, I was raised in Florida, which has been a pretty purple state for a long time, but effectively, it's the job of the legislature to legislate. It's the job of the presidency to execute. It's the job of the judiciary to judge. Okay. So you should not be trying to legislate from the bench. Ryan wasn't saying that. Yes, he was. He was saying that these motherfuckers are legislating from the bench. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, but that's kind of what you're saying. You're saying these motherfuckers are making up laws whole cloth based off of inferences, moral inferences that are not established by previous law. Yeah. And that it's been long-standing guidance that because of the divisions of powers and because of political philosophy, the legislature legislates. They pass the law. It's up to judges to enforce. And sorry, just indulge me like a brief rant real quick. So let's say that in California, they have the 3 strikes law. Okay, because this was hugely controversial during the 1990s because it was responsible for the mass incarceration. Okay, and effectively what that says is if you commit 3 felonies within 5 years or 10 years or something like that, you get a harsh sentence, mandatory. Okay, California passed this law. They made movies about it in the 1990s about how unjust it was. Okay, so if you're a constitutional originalist who believes that it is your job to execute the laws as passed, then you are going to have a pretty firm position that regardless of whether or not a person could shoplift 3 times and steal $200 worth of shit, that could be construed as felonies, and you could put them in prison for 10 fucking years. And what a originalist is going to say, well, that's the law as written. I'm executing the law as written. Whereas a progressive or a living textualist or whatever the fuck is going to say, oh, well, realistically, this person did commit 3 felonies, but when this law was written, they were really trying to go after violent offenders, even though that's not in the legislation. Therefore, I'm going to give them a suspended sentence or whatever the fuck. But they have no basis to do so. They're reliant on them not being challenged in order to effectuate that ruling.
And here's the thing, just to maybe land the plane on the moral issue here. What that does is it effectively makes judges kings. Because if every branch does their own thing, one legislates, one executes, one judges, now we have 3 co-equal branches. But if the judicial branch has total oversight over everything the other branches do and can tell them how to do it and can just take authority whenever they feel like taking it, now you have a super branch. Ironically, the branch with no power, and then everyone could just ignore it if they stop wanting, if they want to. So they really shouldn't do this because it's going to break the whole system apart. But the moral issue is this. People think of constitutional rights as a good thing. I tend to. Most people tend to. Freedom of speech, isn't that nice? But that's not the only way to view it. A constitutional right is something that has been removed from democracy. You are not allowed to vote to infringe on speech. You are not allowed to use your vote to decide that people can't have guns. You are not allowed to use your vote to say that Catholics are not allowed to practice their faith. These are things that are removed from democracy. Now, that's okay because the people decided to remove them from democracy by passing an amendment. So the people decided these things are so important that they cannot be infringed by a mere law. But if a judge makes the shit up, if a judge just removes an issue from the democratic process because they think it's right, but the people never signed up to it, the judge is becoming your tyrant. The judge is now shrinking the scope of democracy without the people's consent. That's massively fucked up.
But what's ironic about this is now I'm going to want to pick your brain about the unitary executive, and there's a lot of people who are responding with the same chat, and it's in a super chat, so I'm going to read it real quick. So Owlishness for 5 says, if the executive branch is supposed to execute laws, then why does Trump have his hand in every single pot possible? He won't let people do their jobs. Okay, I'm actually going to like this because this is, for me, this is a great question. So the executive, and this was talked about by the founding fathers, is that the executive has crept because basically, I would say this is almost like a human instinct, okay? A human instinct is we have a problem and we pass a law to deal with said problem. But what happens is there's so many problems within so many realms of society, drug abuse, theft, murder, rape, environmental concerns, how you build your electronics, all that kind of shit, is that the creep of the executive branch effectively has them creating a whole bunch of administrations into control is the mean way to say it, but in order to administer endless amounts of human life. And not only that, but within, specifically when it comes to immigration, which I think is the best example, it has been argued that the federal government has specifically been abstaining from executing its duties in reference to immigration for the past 50 years, maybe 60 years, where we have rules on the books that say you cannot be in the United States if you are violating your visa, if you overstay your visa, if you don't have a visa, you cannot be in the United States. We will deport you. But what's happened is there's so much economic benefit from illegal immigration and under the table work that everyone has bitched about it, but nobody has enforced it. And so what Trump has done is, and by the way, this is bad, to be clear, this is bad, is he has over enforced on immigration and then chosen not to enforce in areas that he's not interested in. For instance, in reference to the EPA, in reference to the Department of Education, he's like, fuck this. Federal government should have never been involved. I'm gutting it. I'm reforming it. I'm cutting down its responsibilities by 80%. And if you have a problem with it, eat a dick. And then he's like, we are going black and white on immigration. If you are violating immigration law, we will fuck you up. I do not care if you're a grandma with citizen kids. You've been here for 70 years. If you're in violation of immigration law, you're fucking going. And so, but that's the thing. He has popular mandate from the MAGA base specifically to do this because they simultaneously, I'll finish up this rant, I promise. They simultaneously resent the over enforcement and broad sweeping powers of the federal government that have encroached on Americans' lives in every aspect of life that you could possibly think of. And they also resent the non-enforcement of immigration statutes. So while that might not be popular outside of MAGA, that's incredibly popular within MAGA. End of rant.
Yeah. So look, the reason people vote for president is that the phrase, he's charged with executing the laws. Boy, that's broad. And the president, like, people vote for presidents who are going to share their priorities in terms of how the laws should be executed. And the laws almost never are plug and play. Like, they're almost always broadly written. There's an incredible amount of discretion. Think about the way prosecutors charge crimes. Do you think they charge every criminal with every crime that happens in the United States? Hell no. There's a selection process. Some don't get arrested. Some never get caught. Some get arrested and not charged. Some get pled out. There's always discretion, and that's what people are voting for with president. How are you going to exercise your discretion? And I think with the Biden administration, they saw this crazy thing where immigration law didn't change between Trump 1, Biden, and Trump 2. Immigration law has been basically the same. But in terms of how the law is enforced, you could have millions and millions of illegal border crossings in a short time period versus almost none and be out on net negative, just purely based on how that discretion is used. And that's the power of the presidency. Now, with regards to kind of the unitary executive theory point, and I'll try to be brief. So
that's where I was going next. Yeah, I'm so happy you jumped to it immediately.
So I don't rant.
No, please, because I did like 5 minutes, so you do 5 minutes.
There's a fundamental difference between the left and right in how they view the ideal expression of executive authority. And I would say the left's version is a tyrannical hellscape, but we can get into that. The left wants to have a broad federal government that can have power almost over everything that happens in America, from the minutia, the day-to-day, health, elections, education, everything. Total federal, there's nothing the federal government can't do. But they don't want the president to have total control over it. They want it to be delegated to agencies where where experts will take over and will make expert decisions, and the president can't really interfere with them. So they want to create a technocratic bureaucracy that will govern us rather than, I would say, popular democracy. Then on the right thinks that the federal government should be much, 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 much smaller. There should be no Department of Education. The federal government should have nothing to say about marriage. It should be totally absent from these areas, right? But in the core areas where the federal government has power, there is a unitary executive. So if you give the executive power, he's not ruled by these technocrats. He has the power to fire them. They work for him. If they don't do what he wants, he can just fire them. That's what the Constitution requires. So the left wants a broad, powerful federal government with an executive who can't really control the bureaucracy. And the right wants a small federal government where the executive has control over the bureaucracy that exists because the executive is the popular democratic check on the bureaucracy. If you don't like what the government's doing, you vote for a different president. And if you insulate them from the political process, then you're ruled by a bureaucratic nightmare.
I have two thoughts simultaneously. And one of them is that there was this quote from Charlie Kirk after he passed. Somebody was like, "Oh, you think Charlie Kirk's evil? Watch this compilation of clips." clips. And one of the compilation of clips was effectively like, I think the federal government's budget should be $2 trillion. It should exclusively be military and then like these social services, like very bare bones social services. And I think he was sincere, but I think the reason why that's such a popular propagandized position on the right wing is because it really does appeal to the people who want like a vigorous military industrial complex, because we can still afford a vigorous military industrial complex with a $2 trillion budget if you cut all the social services. And then I think it also appeals to fiscal conservatives because they're like, oh, we don't have to pay for Medicare anymore. We don't have to pay for Social Security anymore. We don't have to pay for Medicaid anymore. We don't have to pay for this. We don't have to pay for that. Awesome. So it simultaneously appeals to like militarists, like minarchists, basically. Militant libertarians who think that the state should only be in charge of security. And it also appeals to fiscal conservatives. And I do think that that was genuinely held despite being like a easily propagandizable position. I want
to add to that list, though. It also appeals to constitutional originalists, because the only reason, if you look at the Constitution says that the federal government only has limited powers. It is only allowed to regulate interstate commerce, not commerce, right? So Social Security is almost devoid of interstate aspect. Most people just live in a state and retire. Like, this is not like an it's very tangential to get to interstate from here. The only reason that all these like massive regulations are legal under the interstate commerce theory is that FDR threatened to pack the court, and as a result, to save them from court packing, the Supreme Court caved and ruled that interstate commerce means basically anything that has any tangential impact on interstate commerce. It's a case called Wickard v. Filburn. It's probably the worst case in our American jurisprudence. So we went from having a limited government to having an unlimited government. But if you look at what the Constitution actually says, the federal government should not be allowed to do any of this shit. It shouldn't have the power. If we want to have retirement benefits, the states should be the one to do it. That's what they're for. That's a local issue.
And weirdly enough, that would actually free a lot of people up to make choices, because if you wanted to live in a state that had universal health care, if you wanted to live in a state that had universal retirement, then you could go live in California or Massachusetts or New York or wherever. And so as a result, you would have a bigger cushion, but you would also have, and some of those places have like geographic reasons for why they're going to be wealthy regardless of governance, because California is so rich in resources that industry is going to be attracted to that location regardless of legislative structure. And so basically California and Massachusetts could have those universal welfare programs. And then if you went to rural Kentucky or West Virginia or those places like New Hampshire that were more like live free or die, we're going to have low taxes but substantially less social services, then you could go live in those places. And then your tax burden would be sufficiently less. But then also, if you die, you die. But like, it's kind of like it's like Minecraft on hardcore mode. Like if you fucked up, you're fucked. It is what it is. But hold on, there was an idea that I don't want to lose, which is, through Trump, do we not have the worst of both worlds? And what I mean by that is, it seems like the Supreme Court has, through their immunity ruling, but also through other rulings, I suppose, that I think the immunity ruling is probably the biggest one. They have said, no, unitary executive, as long as you're acting within this scope of your official duties, then effectively, and you're executing your duties, hopefully in good faith, you have immunity, therefore you can carry out your duties. But then it doesn't seem like the unlimited nature of the federal government has been reeled back in. And so as a result, in my opinion, if you believe this is a problem, then it feels like Trump nibbled at the edges. He didn't really limit the scope of the power of the federal government. And therefore, when Trump's gone, not only do you have the unlimited scope of the federal government to go to rule over every topic, you also have effectively, I know that you're not going to agree with the definition of unlimited executive, but you kind of have an unlimited executive because it says, well, as long as it's within the scope of his duties and he's acting in good faith, you can't really do anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, look, the immunity doctrine was constitutionally mandated. Like it was required. So, it's not a policy decision, but there's aspects of it where
you think it's a reinforcement of a concept that was already there.
Separation of powers.
Okay.
Like, I mean, I don't need to, I've done so many hours on this, but just to give you the basics, there are certain things the president has exclusive power to do, like pardon, for example, right? Congress has no power there. So Congress can't regulate it. But if they passed a law that said, if you pardon Connor, we can send you to jail, Mr. President. Now they're regulating the pardon power.
Mm-hmm.
So they can't do that. But what if they passed a law that was really vague? They said, like, if you use a government power to benefit Connor, you will go to jail. It doesn't say pardon. And then the president pardons Connor and they say, you used a government power to benefit Connor, you go to jail. Well, now you're regulating the pardon power indirectly, right? So the immunity came from that. It's the separation of powers issue. There are certain things the president has exclusive power to do. Congress can't make them crimes. Because Congress can't make them crimes, you can't go to court and prosecute him for those crimes for doing things that are his exclusive purview. That's where the constitutional immunity doctrine came from, was just this concern about separation of powers. So it's not.
Well, and this was my interpretation. And I think Pisco disagrees with me, and I think a lot of liberals disagree with me. But I do see Fashion 40. I see your super chat, and I like it, and I want to address it momentarily. But so, for instance, I think that the execution of duties as commander in chief includes military power, right?
Yeah.
So deployment of forces, how it conducts itself, modernization programs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are things that Congress can pass the finances for, and the president as a chief executive can direct kind of like how it's executed. And that's just part of the presidency. However, within the laws of the United States of America, it is inconceivable that ordering the rape of Nanking in Detroit, Michigan would be in good faith pursuant to the role of the chief executive of the Department of Defense or Department of War. So if Donald Trump said, we are going to rape and murder every single person in Detroit, Michigan, I'm ordering the military to do so. You cannot check me through the legislature. You cannot check me through the judiciary. I am the sole authority over the military. Therefore, this is a lawful action. I still think, based off of the constitutional framework of our republic, that would so clearly be illegal, unconstitutional, prohibited by half a dozen amendments, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that in good faith, the military could and should resist those unlawful orders, and the judiciary and the legislature could say, through whatever means they have, this is outside the scope of the roles of the president because it's not the lawful execution of his duties. Whereas I do feel like Pisco is effectively saying, like, no, the Supreme Court said Trump can do whatever he wants because he's president.
Pisco is taking a position. Pisco doesn't actually like to talk about how judicial process works because it's inconvenient for him politically. So here's how this actually works. The Supreme Court decides a case before it, and they articulate a rule based on that case. The case that we are talking about was the Trump election case, which involved whether the core question was whether or not, when he is giving direction to the attorney general about what crimes and what crimes to investigate, is that core executive behavior? And I think the answer pretty obviously is yes. Like you're trying to enforce the laws, you're talking to the attorney general, that's core executive behavior. The case does not articulate the outer boundaries of the immunity doctrine. It doesn't articulate all the exceptions. It doesn't articulate anything about the military because military wasn't involved in that case. So God forbid we had a subsequent case about the ordering of rape of Nanking, as you've articulated. I've written an article on this. It's on my X page if anyone wants to check it out. My theory is that in that case, in the fact pattern you gave, the Supreme Court would rule as follows. Now, do I know this is true? No, this is my guess because the Supreme Court has not said this. I'm just guessing. If I were one of them, what would I say? I would say treason is a constitutionally defined crime. one of the elements of treason is that you have allegiance to the United States, but you are making war against it. If the executive is actually making war against the United States, it is impossible for him to be doing so within his official capacity. Like, making war against your own country is definitionally
and therefore
outside,
it would be treason. Yeah,
therefore treason, and therefore not immune. That's how I think that would turn out, but I don't know.
This is another thing.
That's just my guess.
I really wish I'd gotten my fucking JD so I could argue this shit harder and people would take me more seriously on it. But I'm too old and tired and I don't want to get a JD. One of the things that frustrates me too is that I think so. We have the supremacy clause. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. But effectively, like, when there is conflict between a lower ruling or a lower law and the Constitution is automatically preeminent because of the supremacy clause.
Yep.
And so, if the Constitution specifically says that the impeachment process is for what is it? It's like high crimes and misdemeanors that the president may commit or whatever.
And by the way, there's no. The Supreme Court will not rule on what constitutes a high crime or misdemeanor. So the Congress can kind of just make that up. Like, it's up to them.
Well, but that's what I was going to say, is that saying that paralegal counterpoints. I should get like a paralegal associate's degree.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm arguing with Pisco, I could be like, well, I have a paralegal associate's degree in legal filings. You know, God, that's almost worth it. That's almost worth it for the shit post.
I mean, at the very least, you should make you should just print up the certificate and just put it on your wall.
Right. Well, I have an associate's in legal proceduralism.
Actually, Pisco, I got my JD from Harvard since we last spoke. Do you see that on the wall?
I mean, Harvard, in Cartagena, Colombia, but still Harvard
nonetheless.
So hold on. So the point that I was trying to make, though, is that, like, if the impeachment process for the Constitution says this, but then the Supreme Court says, no, you can never charge a president ever you can never impeach him for anything. Yes, that's alarming because you have the Supreme Court being Trump's sycophants and trying to sweep for them through the legal process. However, it's so clearly violative of the Constitution that effectively all it would take is somebody testing that concept through the legislative process in order to revert back to the original Constitution. Well, and Fashion 40, once again, I do want to address that super chat, so I still have it up.
Yeah, and Connor, just to make sure that we're clear about something, because this is just a point that people get confused about all the time. The immunity decision is really specific. It's about a future administration charging a president for crimes related to his actions while he was in office. The immunity decision does nothing to change the impeachment process. Like, just because they're immune from criminal prosecution does not mean you can't impeach them for the exact same thing, right? So, like, the check on presidential power remains impeachment, and it remains elections. Like, the idea that, like, a future criminal prosecution was the thing that deterred presidents from being tyrannical is kind of a joke, because, like, if you really think about it for more than a second, you're like, wait, if they just became sufficiently tyrannical, there is no next administration to prosecute them. This doesn't seem like the sort of thing that actually checks a tyrant. The thing that checks a tyrant is, separation of powers, the balance between the branches, checks and balances, impeachment process, this sort of thing. Is, after the fact prosecution is, let's be honest, it's a means of punishing your political enemies more often than not.
So I want to address this super chat from Fashion 40. Thank you for the super chat, by the way. So basically, the Rust Belt deserved it, says Fashion 40. And I want to address this because I know exactly what he's talking about. So what you said, is that we have universalized federal programs that constitutionally probably were never supposed to be universalized. So, for instance, Medicare, Medicaid, what was the other one, like Social Security, all that kind of stuff. And if you look at the framing of the Constitution, those were probably supposed to be down at the state level, not the federal level. But that ruling that you cited in the early 20th century made it so the Fed started doing it.
Wickard v. Silver. Every bad idea in our fucking Constitution comes back to FDR. You connect the dots back enough, it's always that fucking dude. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
So,
FDR
although
roasted.
FDR is a progressive hero, so it's unsurprising to me that my chat is like, "Fuck you, Ryan, kill yourself." So, the point being, though, you said like the Rust Belt deserved it. So, for those of you who are unaware of the sociological phenomena, post World War II, America was an industrial hub, the way that China is currently an industrial hub, because mostly the entire industrialized world was destroyed. And so that lasted for 10 or 20 years. But then what happened because of competition and free market economics and all that kind of stuff, a lot of other places developed industrially and were able to produce goods significantly cheaper than the United States. So what happened is manufacturing hubs like Detroit is probably the most often cited one, became hollowed out because all of the major manufacturing industry that was a part of those communities was shipped overseas. And so what happened is you had those places gutted, and what ended up happening is the people who had money moved to other metropolitan areas, or they found their economic niches within the dying city. And then a lot of people suffered through this economic transition of manufacturing being shipped overseas. And realistically, this is a part of the narrative of the economic populism that Trump appealed to, was effectively, you were fucked over by global economics and you haven't had an economic voice for the past 50 years. Let me be your economic voice. And then, of course, he passed tax cuts because that's going to solve the Rust Belt. My frustration with saying, well, we're going to fix the Rust Belt through massive federal entitlement programs is that that's not how you're going to solve the Rust Belt. On a individual perspective, you absolutely should vote with your feet. If your options are staying in a dying city, watching your real estate price collapse by 95% over the course of 30 years, or moving to a new city with additional industry in order to make sure that your family is taken care of, the obvious answer is vote with your feet. Systemically, the solution should be those cities coming up with what is our competitive advantage? What is our industry? What is the regional thing that makes us better at something than everybody else? And then honing that into a local civic identity that then creates the kind of economics that is going to be productive for that city. And unfortunately, the Rust Belt has been left behind, has been hollowed out, has been fucked up. And realistically, it's only rebounding now.
Yeah,
Like,
and look, we don't need to do geopolitics in this conversation, so since we did it last time. But I will say, I don't. There's aspects of Trump's geopolitics I love. There's aspects I'm less fond of, like the tariffs. But one thing I appreciate about the way he's approached it is that if you look at Europe, they've basically taken the position that China is ascendant and that the West is going into managed decline. And that's what's happening. And that's really the through line for a lot of their policies. And Trump has taken the position that no, American exceptionalism is not dead, and we are going to find ways to reassert ourselves on the global stage and be forceful, which I think is good. If you believe in American hegemony, if you believe in American exceptionalism, this is a good thing. I don't want to go quietly into the night with Europe. That's not the vision for the country that I have. And by the way, I think our way of life is better. I'm not a cultural relativist. I think that like the American values are better than the competing alternatives of Russian values and Chinese values. I think we should be asserting ourselves on the world stage. So, it's like, it's tricky because you said earlier, Trump is like the worst of both worlds. And in some ways I'm sensitive to that because there's some parts of this where you're like, God, we have this very powerful executive. And what's going to happen when the next guy gets power? On the flip side, he's been successful in areas where other people have not been. Like he's been successful in actually taking a stand against Chinese attempts to create a new hegemony. He's been successful in reconstituting the court in a better way. He's been successful in attempting to knock down the DOE and other branches of bureaucracies that probably shouldn't exist in the first place. He's actually moving the ball.
These things are good.
Yeah,
that's the
well, he's not, he's not
line.
successful if you're a progressive. He's successful,
right?
Yeah, but fuck you, progressives. I don't want you to win. I want you to lose. I think your priorities are stupid and bad. Like how about this? Like progressives in the
God, I'm so much nicer than you.
Progressives in Connor's chat, riddle me this. Do you like our healthcare system? Do you like the fact that we get our healthcare from our employers? Is that a thing you're fond of?
But they wanted to go further in the left direction, not further in the right direction.
This is what I was waiting for. Have a lot of them answer the question, Connor? I can't see chat.
They haven't. Okay, they haven't.
Well, then you're fucking pussies. So here's the setup line. Our bullshit economic system for healthcare was the byproduct of your hero FDR. It's his fault. It wasn't capitalists twirling their mustaches. FDR instituted wage ceilings as a wartime effort during World War II. Companies couldn't attract employees by increasing wages, so they offered health insurance as a substitute incentive, and it became the IRS ruled it was tax-free, and the industry of employer-sponsored healthcare was created. So what the progressives did is they created a bullshit system that everyone agrees is bad, and now they're saying, "Oh my God, remember." It was a long time ago. I hope you forgot that this bullshit system was our fault. Give us more government power so we can fix it. It's like, motherfuckers, you broke it. Why am I giving you more power to fix the thing that you broke?
This is where I will steel man the left wing in the proceduralism, including Obama, by the way. So for instance, one of the chief objections that my parents, who are fiscal conservatives, have with Social Security is not that we pay, and I know we're talking about healthcare. I'll get back to healthcare, I promise. But it's not that we have a bare minimum payout system for people of approximately retirement age in order to be able to eat cat food and live in an apartment, right? That's not their objection. Their objection is that there's no investment vehicle. So what happens is the cash literally goes from taxpayers. This is my understanding of it, and you can correct me at any point. But the cash literally goes from current taxpayers straight into the federal government and then straight into the checking accounts of Social Security recipients.
With no investment at all, correct.
No investment at all.
That's currently the system, yeah.
And that model, it was modeled off of perpetual economic growth, and it doesn't function, but it kind of functions as long as we have perpetual economic growth, because hopefully you can tax enough in order to pay for the previous generation, because the next generation is larger than the previous generation. Therefore, you can pay for and hopefully the retirees are dying, even though they refuse to die. But hopefully the retirees are dying over time, and as a result, you have less people to pay. And since the generations subsequently get bigger, you can keep this model up. However, the problem, and this was my parents' fiscal conservative criticism of the Social Security system, is effectively like demographically, we're not growing. We do not have an investment vehicle. And so what's happening is the bankrupting of the system is accelerated, it is accelerated, and effectively there's a generational bust like within the system right now.
We're going to run out of money in less than 10 years. It's going to be...
we can still perpetuate the system by like slashing benefits by like 30% or something like that. And we could extend it out a few decades. I think we can also finance it through like some shit that's actually not like, it's like a 5% tax or a 2% tax or some shit like that. I forget. But the point is that like their criticism is that the system is fundamentally broken because it was poorly designed from the outset. And so if you want retirees to be able to do this, if you want retirees to be able to eat cat food and live in an apartment based off of federal income, then you must like repeal and replace Social Security, because it's going to implode.
Oh yeah. And what would you replace it with? Well, one of the things that's changed in recent times is that back in the day, to invest in the stock market, you had to be rich. You had to have an advisor.
Well, hold on. Sorry, real quick, just because my chat's getting pissed at me. Jamie Harris says, how is that a steelman of anything? Connor is just agreeing with him so far. Well, number one, I'm being descriptive. I don't even think I've made a prescriptive statement.
That's
number two,
factual.
I'm not. Yeah. Number two, I wouldn't be opposed to a sovereign wealth fund. So effectively, instead of the Medicare dollars, and I know that you were saying that there was a federal law that basically should not have been passed, but I would not be opposed to literally taking all the money that is currently being dumped into Social Security, putting it into $1 trillion sovereign wealth fund that invests back into the economy, and then it makes payments out of the revenue generated through the investment. That's what I would do.
Well, and quite frankly, Trump is doing a version of that now. Like the thing, those Trump accounts, what they are, like for my kids, I have their tax advantage college savings account. So you put money in, they invest the money in a broad spectrum of like ECF investments in the stock market, which kind of minimize your risk and maximize your long-term returns, and they get preferential tax treatment. When Trump made those Trump accounts, that's what he's kind of doing. He's creating an account for every new kid that gets $1,000 put in it. That's kind of the sovereign wealth aspect that they can't touch till they're 18, but they could let it ride longer. And now all you need to do to retire comfortably is start putting a little bit of money in that every time you get a paycheck. Just add some money to it. Add $50, right? And I will tell you that, like, when I was teaching, before I was a lawyer and started making lawyer money, when I was making teacher money, I had a very small retirement account. This is circa 2006. So like between 2006 and 2008, I saved $10,000 in this retirement account, and it was invested in the stock market. It's like a 401k, right? That shit is worth like 70 plus now, because it doesn't do what Social Security does. It invests and it grows over time. And when the market crashed in 08, when the market crashed in 21, that shit was great for me because it bought in cheaper. And then when the market came back, it made me a shit ton of money. So, you know, when I look at Social Security, your criticism resonates, because if I didn't have to pay Social Security taxes, if I could have just invested the same money I paid into Social Security taxes into the type of investment vehicles that I've always invested in and are available to the public on Robinhood, anyone can do it, I would be a fucking millionaire right now. I would be a millionaire today if I was allowed to do that.
But what I hear, and I think what a lot of working class schmoes hear when they hear that, is that not only am I stupid and for some reason there's something wrong with my brain. Okay, there is fundamentally something wrong with my brain, where I do not want to do, and maybe this is laziness, I don't know what it is. I either do not want to do, nor do I have the intelligence to take I could do like a simple 401k. That's not a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I could do like an intermediate savings account, right? That's fine. But there are a shitload of people more dumb than me, okay, who cannot or will not save for the future. They just won't. And so if you go to this individualist, like, well, just invest your savings, dickhead, then what happens is the working class, and you remember being a teacher, I'm sure you remember how fucking broke you were. You probably were looking at that fucking retirement account with a little bit of resentment, because you were probably thinking to yourself, like, fuck, like I really could have used that cash for something today that I needed for my kids, or I needed for my wife, or I needed to pay this bill, or I needed this, or I needed that, right?
Well, I was single, so my back in my teaching days, I could control my finances a little bit better. You know, I could live.
Then you cheated.
I lived in a shitty apartment. I lived in a cheap part of town, so I could save my money. You know, like, I mean, you can make.
All right. Okay. But then for those of us who are poor dumbasses, effectively what we hear is like, well, just invest money, dumbass. And it's like, dude, I haven't had money in my checking account for 4 days. You know what I'm saying? And like, I'm saying this earnestly. I haven't had money in my checking account for 4 days. My bills are paid. My power's on. My kids are fed. Everybody's clothed. There's gas in the car. But after I pay my taxes, after I pull out my taxes, since I'm self-employed, but after I pull out my taxes, after I pay all my bills, after maybe once a pay period, I have some takeout food, there is no extra cash. So unless you get a vehicle like the government to take that wealth and set it aside for working class people, then effectively we have a K economy where people such as yourself, above average intelligence, JD, able to invest your money, et cetera, you're going to fucking spin up into the stratosphere. But for the working class people who bust ass in order to make the society function, they're going to be eating cat food in an apartment. And effectively what they say is, well, eating cat food in an apartment isn't exactly a dignified life, but it's better than being dead. So I want this entitlement to continue, because if I'm going to put in 60 years of productive labor into this society, when I'm 70 or 80, I should be able to eat cat food in an apartment.
All right, but here's the thing. Let's say you make, I don't know what you make, but let's say someone makes like 60K a year, which if you're making 60K a year and you're single, you're actually probably able to live a pretty nice lifestyle. If you got a family, that's a lot tougher, right? So like let's.
I got a wife and 2 kids. They're expensive.
Yeah, exactly. That's expensive. So let's say someone's making 60K a year. They're paying 4,000, maybe like 4,300, somewhere in that range in just Social Security taxes. Just Social Security taxes. So the question isn't, Connor, like, would you rather make the same amount of money and have no benefits? The question is, if somebody gave you that $4,300 a year back, could you do something with it that's better than putting it into a system that will not exist in 10 years, probably?
Well, people are hold on. No, but this is the thrust of it, though. People are fucking stupid. They're not going to put it into an investment vehicle. They're going to buy a Ski-Doo.
But let me finish the point. And then you layer on to that the Trump accounts. So now you don't need to open an investment account. The government did it for you. You don't need to pick stocks. It has an automatic investment into a pension fund, like a sovereign wealth fund. That's what it goes. So now all you need to do to be better off than you would have in the Social Security system, and I mean orders of magnitude better off, you'll retire with 10 times more money. All you need to do is, when you get your paycheck, elect to put $50 into that account. That's it. Like, I mean,
is this in your world? Is this voluntary or compulsory?
Voluntary.
Yeah, dude, fuck that. Like honestly, this is where I
are you sure you're a conservative?
I am truly paternalistic about this. If you give me an extra $50, okay, and maybe this is like PTSD or short-term thinking or some shit. Maybe like the warrior gene that like black people are accused of having. Maybe I have the warrior gene. I don't know. But the point is, like, I need to eat now. My kids need to eat now. I need to keep the power on now. My house needs to be paid because actually that's my primary investment vehicle. I have shit that needs to happen now. If you make it voluntary versus compulsory, the voluntary shit is not going where it needs to go for a long-term investment strategy, because I need to survive now. And by the way, I'm doing better than like the vast majority of working class people.
But so
why do we
have to tyrannize the population in order to protect people from having to make the easiest decision possible that the government, and I'm not saying the government makes it hard,
because it's not an easy decision.
The government is facilitating.
If your choice is eat ramen for the next 2 weeks or put $50 away, you're going to buy some Vienna sausages to mix up with your fucking ramen.
But Connor, but you get an extra $4,300 a year.
Right. And what I'm telling you is shit is so expensive for the working class that $4,300 is not going into an investment account. In 99% of it, 99% of it is probably going into food.
But here's the thing. Ultimately, what you're talking about, Connor, is why Social Security doesn't work. Because you can get all kinds of fancy about why.
No, bullshit. Bullshit.
No, it is why it doesn't work. Because the thing that makes Social Security not work is that it norms all the risk out of the system. When you invest, there's risk. When you choose to save, there's risk. But the thing about risk is what's rewarded in stock market growth. When you risk your capital, you get return on your capital. That's how money grows. This current Social Security system takes all the risk out, but that's why it doesn't grow any goddamn money. Well, if you're going to,
as well as I know that there's low risk, intermediate risk, and high risk investments accounts. And effectively what happens, depending on, because they're mutual funds, right? So it's like a pooling of resources that makes a pool of investments, that with like the low risk ones, basically when the stock market gets wiped out, you're only going to lose a very moderate amount of your investment. And then in the intermediate risk, it's going to be a balance. And then in the high risk accounts, it's going to be, basically you're going to get wiped out if the stock market gets fucked. So the reason why, and this is, I think you have a misdiagnosis here that I just heard, which is like the reason why the Social Security doesn't work is because it collectivizes risk, and people need to be able to take risk in order to
grow their money,
play within the game. That's horseshit.
No.
The reason why it doesn't exist, you can't tell me that if you took that $4,300 a year and if you put it into a sovereign wealth fund, and then the sovereign wealth fund itself, which was a diversified mutual fund that was spread across intermediate, low, and high risk investment, and then it made that pot of cash grow, and then you paid people out of that pot of cash, that doesn't require consent from the participant. That doesn't require the person who's paying $4,300 in taxes per year to pick the investment strategy. But that, it just requires that they're taxed, and then the investment is paid back.
But that entails risk.
Sure. Yeah. But collectivizing, to collect taxes. Hold on, real quick. This is important. Risk and insurance companies, insurance companies and taxation are inherently vehicles that collectivize risk.
Yeah. My issue with Social Security, to be clear, like even back in the day, there was a time period because of the way the country was divided demographically, where there were more workers than elderly by a pretty wide margin. So Social Security was in the black. It was actually saving money because they could tax so many workers and they were paying out very few.
Hold on. Now I need to get fucking pissed. Hood Monkey says, I'm 35 and I have $750,000 worth of assets and I started making $62,000 a year at the hospital bedside. Don't tell me it can't be done. Then why is your fucking name Gray, Hood Monkey? You're sitting on $1 million. You're talking about how fucking rich you are, and you're not even a fucking channel member. Get the fuck out of here.
He's not wrong.
Get the fuck out of here.
He's not wrong. Like I would, you, if you're careful with your money, 62 is, you can do very well retiring on 62,000 a year. But the point, Connor, I was making is that even when there was a surplus in Social Security, they were not investing it in anything that had risk, like a sovereign wealth fund. They were holding it on like essentially checking account interest. So, like the problem with the system is that it is built to fail because it does not have like modern investment strategy or tactics built into it. So there'll just never be enough money. It will always require raising taxes for reduced benefits. And the ratio will just get worse and worse and worse. Like, today, you would have been better off if you invested the money when you retire. If they raise taxes and slash benefits, that's going to be an order of magnitude worse. It's basically putting every American into $200,000 or so of debt slavery. That's what the current system is. So yeah, I think that sucks.
Sure. Let's get to the through line, because basically the only reason why I got pissy, and I'm sorry for getting pissy, but the reason why I got pissy is because I think this is where Republicans go too far. I really do. I think this exact conversation is where Republicans go too far, because there's this, and by the way, like I do admire the founding documents, but they are clearly an individualist, voluntary, in liberty-centered series of documentation. And I feel like that it's good for sane, rational, intelligent people. But most people are not sane. Most people are not rational. Most people are not intelligent. They're actually, I'm going to use an ableist slur, they're pretty fucking retarded. So republicanism, representative democracy, in my opinion, is misused when it's used to slash the things that keep stupid but hardworking people, which I include myself in, stupid but hardworking people, when it hurts them through allowing them to fall through nets, is dumb. But designing a better net is good. So if you and I can agree that Social Security is an inherently flawed system, and you want to cut Social Security entirely, give the average American $4,300 extra per year, which, by the way, let's be real, the second they get that money, economic pressures are going to swallow that shit up. But let's just pretend that we gave the average American an extra $4,300 a year. Or we can take that $4,300 and then we can create a sovereign wealth fund that actually gives people, it solves a host of problems and still gives people the ability to live in an apartment while not, and eat cat food while not dying from starvation or debt in retirement years. I would rather do that. And it's frustrating to me that you would appeal to like individualism in order to bypass that reality.
Yeah, it's frustrating that I appeal to our founding values. That's rough. But like
it is because hold on. Let me give you a hypothetical reality. I want to give you a hypothetical reality.
It is.
I want to give you a hypothetical reality.
No, Connor.
We institute my system. This is important. We institute my system.
Honestly, no. I think what I'm getting at here is that you just went on a long rant about the importance of what I would characterize as progressive values. Because what are progressive values? They are the progress is replacing the core American values of individualism, liberty from tyranny, with different values that are better, more progressive. That's what progressivism is. And you're making the argument for progressivism. So I mean, that's fine to do, but if you're doing
think you're
it, you need to be aware
that
that's what you're doing.
No, I'm making an argument for communitarianism, not collectivism, and communitarianism versus liberalism, because I do think that there is something fundamentally flawed about individualism. And hold on, I want to propose to you two realities, and I already have a suspicion on which one you're going to pick, and we are going to disagree on it. So let's say that we institute my worldview, and there's a world where every single American, we have a sovereign wealth fund. We are no longer going into shitloads of debt in order to prop up Social Security. And every American, when they turn 62, they can live in a shitty apartment on the wrong side of town and they can eat cat food in order to survive. That's world one. And then world two is we give Americans $4,300 a year in increased wealth, but shitloads of the dumbass working class population misuse their funds, or the economy swallows up their funds, as the economy naturally does. And so as a result, we have hundreds of thousands or tens of millions of Americans who are effectively like homeless, destitute, incapable of affording housing, and can't even afford cat food to eat in their 60s to their 90s before they die. But we have the individualist. We are true to our individualist roots. Which world would you prefer to live in?
Okay, well, to be clear, both are better than what's happening today. So both are a market improvement over our current status quo.
Sure, but if you had to choose between the two, which one would you select?
The second is better, because the thing about America that has the thing that made America great over time has been that people are free to make choices and to live with the consequences of those choices. And personally, I just don't think it's going to work out the way you think it will, is the other thing. Like right now, with the Trump accounts being a thing, you don't need a sovereign wealth fund. All you need to do is start putting money into the account that already exists. Literally, it's a question of setting up a reoccurring payment of like $50 a month. That's the entirety. You have to do it once. You do it once in your whole life, and you would be better off. Now, if we get rid of the $4,300,
is it voluntary or compulsory?
It's obviously voluntary. Yeah.
Okay, but Connor, so hold on. There's $1,000. I have two kids. Are the Trump wealth funds? Do they already have $1,000 earning interest for my two children, or do I have to sign up for them first?
I think they were. It depends when they were born. Your kids,
let's just say they were born.
Your kids are
after
too
the date.
old. Your kids are too old to have them.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean that's funny because then my kids are fucked. But let's just assume that my kids had this thing. Okay.
Yeah.
It's
rolling forward. I think it just started a few months ago.
Okay. So how many Americans, number one, are even aware of the Trump account?
I have no idea. This program just started, Connor. I have no data on how successful it's been.
I'll just make my point instead of asking rhetorical questions. The truth is that if it's on a voluntary basis and they don't market it, then there are tens of millions. And let's say that you have to sign up first. It's not compulsory. You don't automatically generate $1,000. You have to go to the fucking some defunct shitty website in order to sign up for it. And then let's say, out of the people who would benefit from this and be substantially wealthier for having done it, number one, shitloads of people haven't heard it. Number two, the people who have heard of it and will sign up for it, that's probably already 90% of the population reduced that could benefit from this program. Then not just that, 90% of the population who do sign up for it are not going to sign up for the voluntary contributions. And then as a result, they're not going to benefit from the program. So as a consequential analysis, you've effectively, while having this opportunity to be incredibly well off, effectively 99% of the population is not going to benefit from this program.
99.
It's voluntary.
You think 99% of the population is so stupid that they can't sign up for a $3,000 for their children if given the all you have to do is say, I would like a free $1,000 for my child. You think 99% of the population is so fucking stupid that they're not going to do that?
My real number for who's too stupid to do it is 60%.
But Connor,
hold on. And then out of the 40% who can,
yeah,
I think that they are probably, if they're smart enough to do it, they're probably smart enough to do it right.
Well, you know what, man? Like, they're so fucking stupid. I bet they don't sign up for health insurance either. We should probably make a mandatory tax to give everybody universal health care. We think they're so fucking stupid. What if they forget to buy healthy groceries? What if they buy shit groceries and their kids are unhealthy? You know what we should do? We should set up a universal grocery delivery system to take that away from them. You know what? They're so fucking stupid, Connor. They might pick the wrong jobs. They might be doing jobs where they're not actually maximizing their skills.
Well, hold on.
We should pick their jobs for them.
No.
Hey, Connor,
this is where you need to add something.
They might be reading the wrong books. We should do? We should have a mandatory book delivery program for these fucking retards. But you know what? Fuck, true. Connor, they might not read the books even if we deliver them. You know what we should do? We should force them
Public
at the
education.
we should force them at the butt of a gun to have reading hour of the books that we want to read. Like, what I'm pushing on, Connor, is that you have adopted a progressive mindset. And even if you are using it to push for conservative values, that's not conservative. Like, you're pushing for a progressive vision of how the country should run.
No, you are misattributing words. Okay, you're misattributing words, and I'll explain how. And I need you, please, pretty please with sugar on top, to add this conception to your worldview. Okay, so I'm going to introduce a conception to you, and I know you are smart enough to understand it. So if we do this, where I explain this conception, and you are incapable or I know you're not incapable. So then at that point, you would just be unwilling. Then I'm going to accuse you of being the mirror of Pisco, where you misunderstand things on purpose because they're inconvenient to your worldview. Okay, so I'm going to explain something.
There's a lot of lead up. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to explain this concept. You are a liberal or an individualist. You believe in the individual autonomy.
Yes.
Right? Okay. And then there's collectivists like communists and fascists who believe that individuals subordinate themselves to the collective whenever it serves the collective good, which is what you are accusing me of being. Okay?
That's not what I'm accusing you of being.
Yeah, you are. You're saying that I'm using progressive logic in order to arrive at collective arguments for social safety nets and bullshit.
That's not what progressivism is. Progressivism is not limited to collectivism and communism. Progressivism.
At the chance of getting distracted, how do you define progressivism?
Progressivism, when you look at like its roots back in like John Dewey, Woodrow Wilson, circa like 1900, 1920, what happened was there was a movement. The old education system, for example, was based around teaching students mastery and key skills so that they would then be able to exercise their liberty and go out in the world and exercise it as they see fit. It's up to them what to do with the education. The progressive model of education was that what we need is citizens of tomorrow. So we should not focus on core skills and autonomy. We should focus on creating people who are going to think and believe and have maybe less voluntarism, maybe less of a choice in what's happening, but are going to be the kind of citizens that we want. The progressive vision is to move away from individualism towards the state taking a guiding hand onto how people are acting in a lot of the ways you're describing. Now, communism is like an extreme end point of progressive theory, but you can be a progressive without being a communist. I'm not accusing you of communism, Connor. I'm accusing you of believing that the state should be in the business of taking voluntary decisions away from people for their own good, which I think you've admitted you are, which is that's the core of the progressive vision.
Okay, well, hold on. When were these people alive?
I mean, that was turn of the century. That was 1800. That was 1890, 1920s when Woodrow Wilson and John Dewey kind of birthed this movement.
Okay, my definition of conservatism and progressivism. Hold on. I want to get the exact year born. My conception of progressivism is probably between 250 to 290 years old.
Okay.
So we're actually operating with completely different definition sets. Okay.
Sure.
So I need to do communitarianism and I need to do conservatism.
I'm not sure why any of this matters, though, to be honest with you. Like,
it matters because we're using different words to describe different phenomena, and therefore we're talking past each other.
But you agree that as I'm using the word progressive, it does apply to your worldview.
Yeah, but the reason why I don't like that is because progressive has a certain context of supporting, effectively in the modern era. I understand that, like, you're saying that based off of a turn of the century definition of progressivism, I am more progressive than I am libertarian or conservatarian, which is fine. That's true. It's descriptively true.
Okay.
However, my frustration with that is that progressive in a modern context, in my opinion, means like overly annoyingly like woke about social issues, and oftentimes a unlimited desire to spread governmental bullshit and spend money endlessly on the problems of people. And I'm not that. So the reason why I'm getting frustrated is because, yes, you're correct in a turn of the century definition. You're not correct in a modern definition.
But here's the bullshit that the progressives have done. And this is why I'm calling it out, Connor, even at the risk of having what I think is one of our more confrontational conversations. Progressives did this. Here's individual liberty, like core American values, right? They go here. Oh, they get stopped. Here. Oh, they get stopped for a second. Here. Oh, they get stopped for a second. Here. Now we're here. We're all the way fucking over here. And you're like, yeah, man, the people that are here are fucking terrible, but we should be here. And I'm like, no, brother, we should have been back here. When I accuse you of buying into the progressive mindset, I'm saying that you're accepting the status quo of 100 years of them brain fucking people away from American values and saying, oh no, as long as we're not on this side, then we're okay. No, man, that's been the move all along.
This is why we need to talk about a 270-year-old idea, which is called Burkean conservatism. Okay.
Before you do that, what is your timing? Because I think you said something about 2, and I want to make sure you're not fucking yourself.
Realistically, I got to pick up the kid at I need to leave at 2:30, so we still got 15 minutes.
Okay, we got 15 minutes.
I wanted the time because I just have too many things going on at once, so I need the capacity to be able to jump from thing to thing to thing. But this is important, and I want your audience and my audience to hear this. Although my audience has probably heard it.
Let's rock, baby. Go get them.
Okay, so 2 things. So. And I'll try to be as brief as I can, or I'll speak really quickly. Edmund Burke was an English statesman. He was a monarchist, but he's considered the philosophical founder of conservatism. And what he noticed during the French Revolution is that there were people, basically the monarchists, were overly stagnant. They were holding on to dying, decrepit institutions that were falling apart, but they were so scared of the anarchy that would be ushered in by reform that they didn't want to reform anything. But that radicalized the progressives of their days, the Jacobins, the lefties, all those fucking psychos, because they were effectively saying, well, nothing's changing and it's so stagnant, we need to burn the entire fucking system down. And that's what the Jacobins were doing. And so what ended up happening was the bloody French Revolution happened. And Edmund Burke was like, well, I'm in England. This cannot happen here. So we need to figure out a political philosophy that maintains the institutions that are the glue of our social safety net. They're the glue of our society. But then we need to be able to implement the new ideas that are necessary to refresh our civilization as well. And this is conservatism. And weirdly enough, you just described it. So the role of a conservative within this dynamic that Edmund Burke established is to criticize and needle the progressives and the liberals who are endlessly advocating for freedom and social reform and all that kind of bullshit. And what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to needle and shred their ideas. That way you kill the bad ones and you keep the good ones. And so when you say, well, politically, we've moved here, stopped. Well, guess what? That was a conservative pumping the brakes. We've moved here, stopped. Mm-hmm. This is a conservative pumping the brakes. That's actually definitionally Burkean, okay? And so the question is, we can identify things where you think that the left has gone too far and we've drifted too far away from liberalism or individualism, but this is where I want to bring up communitarianism. There is an inherent problem with individualism. And by the way, I am thankful to the individualist philosophers who have given me such an amazing society to be a part of. I am truly thankful to the founding fathers. However, the truth is that individualism is fundamentally incorrect about the nature of humanity. You are not an island, nor am I. I am not born as an individual, okay? When I am born, my parents take care of me, the nurses take care of me, the doctors take care of me, my schools take care of me. Everybody takes care of me and molds me until I'm an adult. And then when I'm an adult, I do have a certain amount of individualism, but that individualism and my willpower is in constant flux with the will of others and with the will of the state and with the will of the collective and with the will of culture. So I'm not a collectivist. I do not believe that it is the role of an individual to subordinate themselves to the collective. However, I am a communitarian, which means that the rights and willpower of the individual are not unlimited, nor are the responsibilities, duties, or obligations of a collective unlimited. We must operate in a society that balances the individual and the collective to the benefit of both. And what I don't like about your proposition is you've taken a moral stance on individualism being like fundamentally correct, almost at like a spiritual level, that individualism is correct. And therefore, even if you would live in a worse society descriptively along 20 different evaluative phenomena, you would still prefer to live in an individualist society because you feel like the founding fathers got it correct. Yeah, they just nailed it. Well, they just nailed humanity.
Connor, when I say that I'm like a deist and a natural law enthusiast, I'm not kidding. When the founders wrote, like, we were endowed by our creator with certain natural rights, amongst them life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and to the purpose of the government, the purpose of having a government is to secure those rights. I don't think they were wrong. Sure. I think they were correct. Now, because I think they were correct, a lot of stuff goes downstream of that, which means that if you are advocating for a government that is tyrannical as to people's liberty interests in order to give them security that is really worse than they would be if they were just making good decisions on their own, that strikes me as contrary to our founding values. And as to your remarks on Burke,
it's not contrary at all. But I'll let you finish because I agree.
As to your remarks on Burke, I think, quite frankly, you're describing Burke, but you're not describing how Burke would view you. Like, when I criticize the progressivism for moving the needle like this, I'm not saying it moved because this was the good consensus and the proper evolution of society. I'm saying conservatives failed to stop a shit ton of bad ideas, and then we got here. And then the conservatives stopped a few, but they didn't roll them back. So now they just built more bad ideas on top of it and more bad ideas on top of it. And my criticism, Connor, adopting the Burkean philosophy for the moment, is that you have accepted the failures of previous conservative generations to police bad ideas as the status quo, as the good development of society, when in fact you should be viewing that as progressive rot that is contrary to our values and something needs to be done about. You can describe Burke all you want, but I actually don't think that where you are is particularly Burkean. I think you've accepted a status quo that is well beyond what should have been the status quo under a Burkean framework.
Well, I mean, so hold on. This is probably descriptively true that Burke would look at how far American society has progressed in reference to
in horror,
sexual. Well, I was going to give examples: sexual taboo, finance, materialism, and all that kind of stuff. And there's a shitload of things that he would probably really strongly object to. That's just true. And so we should fight that out because basically, and by the way, I think that should be, that would literally be an excellent topic for our next discussion, because weirdly enough, I feel like we alluded to it in the beginning of this discussion. Why or what do you view as the excesses of the left that have pushed you in the direction that you've gone to? However, I want to challenge you on something that you said that I feel like should be apparent if it's not already. You said that we're endowed by our creator for the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and to that end, men establish governments or whatever the fuck, right?
I can give you
but what you did, what you've done consistently in your own argumentation, what you've done consistently in this conversation is you've emphasized liberty almost to the detriment of the other things. It doesn't say just liberty. It doesn't say that liberty is the sole principle through which we evaluate and effectuate human happiness. It says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And to the degree that liberals and progressives have been able to chip away your ideology's political power, they have appealed to life. They have appealed to the pursuit of happiness. And they've used that as political leverage in order to balance against the liberty that you have argued for.
Yeah,
and so as a result,
and they've done it by corrupting the term. Like, because
you say corrupting the term, but that's something that we would have to establish through what's the corruption and what they've argued.
Because the rights, natural rights, like the way, if you look at our constitutional structure, even America was premised on these rights being negative rights. They were not things the government provided to you. They were restrictions on the power of the government because they're natural.
But that's not
rights.
what the Declaration of Independence says. You
Yes,
just quoted the Declaration of Independence.
It
just
does.
because the Constitution is viewed as a negative document, where does the Declaration of Independence state that to effectuate
Connor,
these things?
If you were born on an island by yourself, you would still have the natural right to life, but there would be no one there to give you shit. You'd still have the natural God-given right to life. Your right to liberty, your right to pursue happiness, your right to life is God-given. It is not given to you by the government. It's not the sort of thing where you have more right to life because the government gives you bread. What we're concerned about with the right to life is the government fucking killing you. What we're concerned about with like pursuit of happiness is the government taking away your liberty or putting you in jail for lack of just cause without due process. These sorts of things. When we're talking about like what progressives did is that they flipped it. They turned a negative right into a positive right. So now your right to life means you have a right to be fed. But that's not what the founders thought. That's not like a Lockean conception of rights. That's not a deist or a natural law conception of rights. That's some bullshit that Woodrow Wilson and his League of Nations buddies came up with when they were trying to push for universal declarations of rights because they were fucking progressives. So like that's a framework that was adopted by the people that should be the political enemies of the right. So
we need to hold on. We need to next time, because we're running out of time. I got 4 minutes. What we need to do is we need to articulate how we see the state, the government, in its role of enabling humans to pursue life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and the delineation between these being granted by God versus instituted by states. Because here's part of my frustration, but I think it's actually the meat of the topic. You're saying that you truly believe in the American foundational ideas, narrative, mythology, Declaration of Independence, Constitution, etc. Whereas what I'm saying is, I think this is an excellent collective mythos that has birthed what, and mythos being a key operative word, a mythos that has birthed one of the most powerful, interesting, and cool societies in historical existence. But just because it's a powerful mythos doesn't mean that it's inherently true. It doesn't mean that it's actually based off of an evaluation of reality true. It's like the noble lie from Plato or Socrates or whatever the fuck,
I think that's
right?
an illegal chess move, Connor. I think that's an illegal chess move. And here's what I mean by it. Do you agree with me that we're a propositional nation? We're founded on a proposition?
Of course.
Okay. Well, the Declaration of Independence, the values that I just established, is the proposition. So when I say that like progressives are chipping away in American values in a way that's unacceptable, you can't be a propositional nation if there's no proposition. When progressives seek
I didn't say there was no proposition.
Well, but you accept the progressive attempt to change it.
Yeah, but there's literally a sentence in the Declaration of Independence. Let me pull it up. Independence preamble.
I know it by heart if you want it, but
yeah. Well, I mean, do you know the one that I'm thinking of?
We find these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created equal, that they were vested by their creator with certain rights, amongst them life, liberty, and happiness. And to secure those rights, governments are instituted among men, getting their just powers from the consent of the governed. Is that the line? The consent of the governed?
Yeah. Not just the consent of the governed. Sorry, I'm trying to pull it up, and it's also there's another line after that. That whenever the form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect the safety and happiness.
Yeah. So whenever a government.
Well, hold on. So how have Americans for the past 250 years not organized its powers in such form as to them seems most likely to affect their safety and happiness through amendment?
What I'm saying to you, Connor, is that in the first section, they lay out a vision of natural law. They say that the purpose of the government is to secure natural rights and natural law as given by the creator, nature's God, nature's law, which is in the paragraph above, which is a reference to Thomas Jefferson's deism. So that's the purpose of government, is to do those things. And if the government fails to do those things, if they become tyrannical to these natural rights, you have the right to burn it down and replace it with a better government. Now,
I don't know where we're disagreeing with each other.
What progressives did is they corrupted the meaning of the language, because progressives play a lot of fucking language games. They took terms that were understood and clear. Your right to life was not your right to bread. Your right to life was not the government giving you a handout. This would have shocked the founders to their cores to hear that anyone thought that. And they flip it and they say, well, oh, it says right to life. So shouldn't the government give you that bread? Shouldn't the government give you welfare? Shouldn't the government pay for this? Shouldn't the government secure X? And what they're doing is that they flipped it from a vision of negative natural rights to this modern conception of positive rights. But that is the step towards ultimately communism. But the road there is paved with your rights don't come from the God, they come from the state. And the state will give you these things. The state is the one that is in charge of these things. That's the progressive pathway. And I find it disquieting that you have bought into the framework, though your values may be conservative compared to them. What they've done is they've put you in a dialectic where you go, I'm still conservative because I oppose your latest crazy shit, but I accept all the crazy bullshit you did previously. And that's the problem.
Well, we have to, that it is 2:30, so I do have to go. But that's what I think our next conversation should be. Our next conversation is like, what is the previous crazy shit? Right? That's the kind of, and then we have to figure out whether or not we agree on what is crazy and what is not crazy. And then another thing that we're going to bump into, and I can feel it happening rhetorically, is that you are appealing to the founding fathers and their vision for the United States of America, and then you're saying anything outside of this is incorrect. But my scope is not that narrow. So my scope is like, not only is it what is the entirety of the history of the human species and its governance, but then also what is actually true. So, for instance, if you say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are established by a deistic creator, and if you don't subscribe to that, then you don't truly subscribe to the American project. What's going to happen at the end of that is I'm going to say, so the fuck what? Because we can't even agree on the truth claims of this underlying sentence.
But you,
and then we
but
should,
you've
and
claimed
then we
that,
should.
you've claimed that you're a deist in the past and that you believe
I am a
in,
deist.
And
Just
you
because I'm a
believe in
deist,
natural rights.
just because I'm a deist doesn't. A deist, nature's God.
Sure.
Nature's God. That's the other part that we need to get into.
It's in the document.
That's what I'm saying. I don't care about nature's God. The nature of nature's God could entirely be that he cares about every single one of his biological creations. It's also equally possible that nature's God doesn't give a flying fuck about his living creations, and that what he's done is he's imbued order into the existence of things as a function of reality, not as a conscious judgment about the rights of living beings.
Yeah, but
so we would have to go super deep into the nature of reality.
That's literally what Thomas Jefferson believed. He was a like non-interventionist deist.
I'm not a clone of Thomas Jefferson. I'm a human being who lives 300 years after him with a bunch of updated information.
But the question is, Connor, whether American values ought to persist over time, and if not, why not? And I guess the food for thought I'd leave you with is that when you talk to a communist, when you talk to there's some Christian nationalists that I don't have as much problem with, but if you talk to like the kind of brutal version of a Christian nationalist, the kind of like Fuentes-y type, the thing that they're always try to do first is erode the America's moral proposition. They say, no. You're not given rights by God. This is not what the country's all about, blah, 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 because they have to, because they want to replace it with a different moral proposition. And if we don't armor ourselves in our own proposition, we are going to be vulnerable to these radicalists who want to make the country something totally alien to what it ever was or what it should be. So I just want you to be cautious in accepting the poison pill, because what they're offering you is the pathway to our current state of existential crisis. And what I'm offering is the armor against it.
I have a 3-minute rant about the nature of logos and like biblical prescription about like truth and reality.
Pick up your kid though, man. I don't want you to miss your kid.
Yeah. I'll save it for next time.
All right,
but
man.
Hey, as you know, we did get a little bit more spicy than last time, but I had fun.
Always a pleasure.
I like it. I feel like we're scratching at the root of what's wrong with our society right now. So I would like to continue this rhetorical pursuit.
Also, if we bottom this out, I think this will explain why I'm more tolerant of Trump than you are, because he is successful in achieving some goals, even if I don't love his methods. But you might not agree with the goals based on the philosophy you articulated today.
Unironically, I'm seeing how you're viewing this guy as a fire axe with which to chop the progressive, I think you called it progressive rot.
Yeah.
The progressive rot that was enshrined a century ago. So for you, I'm saying, holy shit, look at all the people who are being hurt by slashing at this rot. And then you're saying, I don't give a fuck, we're slashing at the rot. So
I think that's probably where we're going to go. But that's an interesting conversation too. Anyway, Connor, get your kid. I don't want you to be late. That's family first.
Appreciate it.